Captain, Miguel, why are you here?
I am here, Captain, because I have received news that one of the greatest heroes of the country is in trouble.
They mocked a female veteran in a wheelchair. Then her son's army unit surrounded the cafe. "Move your wheelchair, lady. You're blocking paying customers." Manager Rick Torres sneered at former Marine Captain Elena Rodriguez at Sunrise Café. Her son's text buzzed, "Mom in trouble." Torres had no idea Second Lieutenant Miguel Rodriguez's entire Army Ranger company was 15 minutes out and rolling hard. Captain Elena Rodriguez, 48, lost both legs to Taliban IED while leading convoy rescue in Afghanistan. This Mother's Day breakfast with her daughter was supposed to be peaceful until civilian cruelty reminded her why some battles never end. Second Lieutenant Miguel Rodriguez read his sister's frantic text during field training exercise. His mother, his hero, was being humiliated by civilians. Within minutes, Alpha Company 2nd Ranger Battalion was moving toward downtown Riverside with military precision. Captain Elena Rodriguez had commanded Alpha Company 2nd Marine Battalion through 18 months in Afghanistan's deadliest province, where her tactical leadership and personal courage saved dozens of American lives during counterinsurgency operations that required warrior diplomats capable of fighting and peacekeeping simultaneously. The IED blast that claimed her legs occurred during rescue mission to extract ambushed convoy pinned down by Taliban fighters in Helmand Province. Elena had driven her Humvee directly into kill zone absorbing explosive blast while evacuating wounded Marines under heavy enemy fire that would have killed them without her intervention. Her Silver Star Purple Heart and Bronze Star with Valor represented courage under fire that earned respect from Marines who initially questioned whether any woman belonged in combat leadership roles. Her tactical brilliance and personal bravery silenced doubters, while inspiring subordinates who followed her into firefights where death waited around every corner. 20-year Marine career ended with medical retirement, but Elena's transition to civilian life included raising 2 children as single mother while completing law degree that would help other veterans navigate bureaucratic challenges she'd mastered through personal experience and institutional knowledge. Rick Torres managed Sunrise Café with profit-focused efficiency that viewed disabled customers as operational complications requiring special accommodation that reduced table turnover and deterred affluent clientele, seeking efficient service rather than accommodation delays that wheelchair access demanded. His hospitality training emphasized customer demographics and revenue optimization without acknowledging federal disability law requiring reasonable accommodation that he considered bureaucratic burden rather than legal obligation and moral imperative that successful businesses should embrace rather than resist. Torres had never served in military, viewing veterans as damaged goods seeking special treatment, rather than honored guests whose sacrifice earned accommodation and respect that civilian businesses should provide willingly rather than grudgingly under legal compulsion and federal oversight, threatening penalties for discrimination. Second Lieutenant Miguel Rodriguez had followed his mother's military tradition through West Point graduation and Army Ranger School, where his leadership potential and tactical excellence earned respect from superiors who recognized inherited warrior instincts and family military heritage that produced exceptional officers capable of inspiring subordinates through personal example and tactical competence under fire. The Mother's Day confrontation began when Elena arrived at Sunrise Café with her daughter Maria for their annual brunch tradition, expecting routine accommodation that federal law guaranteed and basic human decency should have provided without legal compulsion or managerial resistance. "Ma'am, your wheelchair is blocking the aisle," Torres announced loudly enough for other patrons to hear, creating public spectacle designed to embarrass Elena into leaving rather than requesting reasonable accommodation that his establishment was legally required to provide. Elena maneuvered her racing wheelchair with practiced efficiency while maintaining military bearing that civilian employees should have recognized and respected rather than treating as inconvenience requiring managerial intervention and customer embarrassment. "Sir, I can position my chair to minimize aisle obstruction while maintaining access to the table you've assigned," Elena replied with diplomatic courtesy that reflected Marine officer training in de-escalating civilian conflicts without compromising mission objectives or personal dignity. "Look, lady, this isn't the VA hospital. Regular customers expect normal dining experience without wheelchair accessibility complications that slow down service and create operational challenges that small businesses can't accommodate without losing profit margins." The response revealed Torres' fundamental ignorance about federal disability law and basic human decency. That military personnel had fought overseas to protect for American civilians who apparently didn't value constitutional principles their service had defended. "Maybe you should try restaurants that specialize in disabled customers instead of expecting special treatment at establishments serving normal people." Torres continued, his voice carrying across dining room, where other customers began documenting the confrontation with phones, while some voiced support for Elena. Maria Rodriguez, 16, watched her mother face discrimination that military service should have prevented, but civilian ignorance made routine for veterans whose visible disabilities triggered prejudice rather than recognition of sacrifice, made defending American freedoms that cafe customers enjoyed without understanding their cost. "Mom, let's just leave," Maria whispered, tears forming as she witnessed her hero being humiliated by someone whose freedom her mother had protected through military service that deserved recognition rather than ridicule and institutional discrimination. "No, sweetheart. Some battles require standing ground even when retreat seems easier," Elena replied, her command voice emerging despite civilian clothes and wheelchair that concealed but couldn't diminish the Marine officer whose leadership had saved American lives under enemy fire that civilian populations would never face because warriors like Elena had stood between them and danger. The confrontation attracted attention from other veterans present, including Army Sergeant Major Robert Chin, whose own combat experience recognized Elena's bearing and the injustice unfolding before customers who should have intervened but instead watched discrimination proceed without offering support or challenging managerial abuse of decorated combat veteran. Elena closed her eyes, momentarily accessing the calm center that had carried her through Taliban ambushes and IED explosions, where staying composed under fire meant survival for her Marines and mission success, despite overwhelming enemy opposition and constant mortal danger. "Mr. Torres, I'm Captain Elena Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps, retired. I lost these legs saving American Marines from Taliban insurgents in Afghanistan. This cafe exists because warriors like me protected your freedom to operate businesses in safety that our sacrifice provided." Her voice carried authority earned through combat leadership. But Torres's civilian prejudice prevented recognition of military bearing that should have commanded immediate respect and accommodation rather than continued harassment and public humiliation. "I don't care about your war stories, lady. Military service doesn't entitle you to special treatment that disrupts my business operations and creates accommodation requirements that reduce operational efficiency and profit margins." The dismissal of Elena's sacrifice triggered protective instincts in other veterans present, while Maria's emergency text to her brother activated military response networks that would soon converge on Sunrise Café with overwhelming force and absolute determination to protect the Marine officer whose courage had saved American lives overseas and deserved civilian recognition rather than discrimination and institutional abuse. Second Lieutenant Miguel Rodriguez received Maria's text during live fire training exercise at Fort Benning, where Alpha Company was conducting advanced tactical operations preparing for deployment to combat zones, where Elena's Marine experience had already proven decisive in saving American lives under enemy fire. Sergeant Major Williams' emergency family situation, my mother, Marine Captain Elena Rodriguez, is being discriminated against by civilian establishment. Request immediate response to protect decorated combat veteran facing institutional abuse, Miguel announced to his company commander. Captain Patricia Santos, Miguel's commanding officer, had served alongside Marine units, where Elena Rodriguez's reputation was legendary among infantry officers who understood tactical leadership and personal courage required for successful combat operations in Afghanistan's deadliest provinces. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Alpha Company will respond to protect your mother's honor. Marines and Army Rangers are brothers in arms, and we defend our military families against civilian discrimination. With same intensity, we show eliminating enemy threats overseas. Captain Santos declared. Within minutes, 37 Army Rangers were loading into vehicles with military precision that would have impressed Elena. Their movement coordinated with tactical efficiency that civilian law enforcement couldn't match, and business discrimination couldn't withstand when military brotherhood activated to protect one of their own, whose service had earned institutional respect and federal protection that cafe management was violating through ignorance and prejudice. Word spread through military networks with classified communication efficiency. As Elena's story reached active duty personnel, veterans, and military families whose combined response would demonstrate that attacking one service member's family meant confronting entire military community, whose loyalty transcended service branch boundaries and civilian employment status. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, stationed at nearby Fort Gordon, coordinated rapid response involving Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine personnel whose off-duty time became mission to protect Elena from continued harassment and institutional discrimination that violated everything they'd sworn to defend overseas through military service and personal sacrifice. Captain Rodriguez earned Silver Star leading Marines through Taliban ambushes that saved American lives. Her treatment at Sunrise Café represents civilian failure to recognize military sacrifice that protected their freedom to operate businesses in safety. Our service provided, Gonzalez announced through encrypted communications. The response included active duty personnel from 3 military installations, veteran organizations, and military families, whose combined presence would transform routine Mother's Day harassment into federal civil rights incident requiring institutional accountability and community education about veteran recognition that civilian businesses should provide willingly rather than under legal compulsion and federal oversight monitoring compliance with disability accommodation laws. Captain Santos coordinated multi-service response with tactical precision that demonstrated military capability when properly motivated by institutional injustice and civilian discrimination against decorated combat veterans whose sacrifice deserved recognition rather than harassment and accommodation denial that violated federal law and constitutional principles. All units established perimeter around Sunrise Café while maintaining professional military bearing. Objective is protecting Captain Rodriguez from continued harassment while educating civilian population about veteran recognition and federal disability accommodation requirements. Santos ordered the military response would include uniformed personnel from multiple service branches whose combined presence would demonstrate institutional solidarity, that civilian discrimination couldn't divide or defeat when military families faced attack from businesses that operated under constitutional protections their service had defended overseas. Furthermore, this response demonstrates that military families are protected by an entire military community, whose loyalty extends beyond active service into civilian life, where our brothers and sisters deserve respect equal to their sacrifice defending American freedoms that civilian populations enjoy without understanding their cost. Convoy movement toward downtown Riverside proceeded with military efficiency that local law enforcement monitored with professional respect, recognizing legitimate military response to civilian discrimination that threatened institutional relationship between military installations and civilian communities, dependent on service member patronage and federal economic support that military presence provided through defense spending and personnel stationed locally. Alpha Company's 2nd Ranger Battalion arrived at Sunrise Café with military precision that transformed routine Mother's Day discrimination into federal incident, requiring immediate resolution and institutional accountability for civilian harassment of decorated combat veteran whose service warranted recognition rather than accommodation denial and public humiliation. 37 Rangers in dress uniform formed protective formation around Elena's table, while Captain Santos approached with military bearing that made Torres realize his discrimination had escalated beyond local business authority into federal military matter, requiring immediate correction and institutional policy change. Mr. Torres, I'm Captain Patricia Santos, United States Army Rangers. The woman you're harassing is Captain Elena Rodriguez, Marine Corps Silver Star recipient, who lost her legs saving American lives in Afghanistan. Explain your treatment of decorated combat veteran whose sacrifice protected your freedom to operate this establishment. Torres faced military authority he'd never encountered, while other patrons documented confrontation that would expose his discrimination to national audiences through social media platforms where military communities would demonstrate support for Elena while condemning civilian prejudice against disabled veterans. "Sir, this is private property," Torres stammered. "Private property operating under constitutional protections that Captain Rodriguez defended through military service subject to federal disability accommodation laws that your discrimination violates while dishonoring veteran whose courage saved American lives overseas." Captain Santos replied, her command voice carrying authority that transcended civilian business operations and managerial policies that violated federal law and institutional standards. Congressman Michael Torres, no relation to cafe manager, House Veterans Affairs Committee member, and former Marine officer, arrived after receiving notifications about Elena's treatment from military liaison networks that monitored veteran discrimination and institutional failures requiring congressional oversight and federal intervention. Captain Rodriguez, on behalf of Grateful Nation, I apologize for civilian treatment that violates everything you fought to protect overseas while serving with distinction in combat operations that prevented American casualties and protected civilian populations from terrorist threats. Congressman Torres announced. His presence activated federal oversight that would result in civil rights investigation while generating media attention, demonstrating congressional support for veteran accommodation and institutional accountability. When businesses violated disability law and discriminated against military personnel whose service warranted recognition rather than harassment. Furthermore, Mr. Torres, your establishment's discrimination against Captain Rodriguez violates federal disability accommodation requirements while dishonoring decorated combat veteran whose sacrifice protected constitutional freedoms that enable your business operations under legal protections our military defended overseas. Federal investigation would examine Sunrise Café's compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act, while evaluating systematic patterns of discrimination that Elena's treatment suggested required institutional correction and policy changes ensuring veteran accommodation that federal law required and basic human decency should have provided without legal compulsion. Captain Rodriguez's treatment represents civilian failure to recognize military sacrifice that protected American freedoms through combat operations where she risked her life defending constitutional principles that businesses like yours benefit from without understanding their cost or honoring those who paid the price for your operational freedom. Riverside's business community witnessed unprecedented military response as Rangers, Marines, Air Force personnel, and Navy representatives demonstrated unified support for Elena while condemning civilian discrimination that violated federal law and institutional standards that military installations expected from local businesses serving military personnel and families. Mayor Jennifer Williams arrived to address situation that threatened relationship between civilian community and military installations, whose economic impact supported local businesses through defense spending and service member patronage that discrimination could jeopardize if institutional changes weren't implemented immediately. Captain Rodriguez, on behalf of Riverside, I apologize for treatment that violates our community's commitment to supporting military families whose service protected our freedom through combat operations that deserve recognition rather than discrimination and accommodation denial, Williams announced. Local media coverage generated national attention, while social media campaigns demonstrated overwhelming support for Elena from military communities, veteran organizations, and civilian populations who understood that her treatment represented institutional failure, requiring immediate correction and policy changes. Torres faced termination from Sunrise Café, while ownership implemented comprehensive staff training on veteran recognition and federal disability accommodation requirements, creating policies that exceeded legal requirements while demonstrating institutional commitment to serving military communities with respect and dignity their service had earned through combat sacrifice and continuing contribution to national security. Within hours, Rick Torres was terminated from Sunrise Café, while ownership implemented comprehensive veteran recognition programs and accessibility improvements that exceeded federal requirements, creating model establishment for serving military communities with respect their service had earned through combat sacrifice and continuing national security contributions. Elena's treatment generated nationwide military support through social media campaigns demonstrating institutional solidarity that civilian discrimination couldn't divide when military families faced harassment, requiring community response and federal intervention to protect veteran rights that constitutional principles guaranteed. Congressional legislation established enhanced penalties for discriminating against disabled veterans, while creating rapid response protocols ensuring immediate federal intervention when military personnel faced civilian harassment that violated disability accommodation laws and dishonored service that protected American freedoms through combat operations and personal sacrifice. The Department of Veterans Affairs created veteran advocacy positions monitoring civilian treatment of military personnel while establishing partnerships with business communities, ensuring veteran accommodation that federal law required and institutional respect that military service warranted regardless of disability status or civilian employment circumstances. Elena became spokesperson for disabled veteran rights. Her Marine Corps leadership experience providing credibility that influenced federal legislation while inspiring military communities whose support demonstrated institutional loyalty, transcending service branch boundaries and active duty status. Miguel's Army Ranger Company established permanent liaison with veteran advocacy organizations while creating rapid response protocols, protecting military families from civilian discrimination that threatened relationships between military installations and civilian communities dependent on defense spending and service member economic contribution. Sunrise Café became symbol of institutional transformation as ownership created veteran hiring preferences, accessibility improvements, and recognition programs, honoring military service while demonstrating how civilian businesses could support military communities through policies exceeding legal requirements and institutional standards. Elena's case inspired federal legislation protecting disabled veterans from discrimination while establishing rapid response networks, ensuring immediate intervention when military families faced harassment, requiring community support and institutional accountability that civilian prejudice couldn't withstand when military brotherhood activated for family protection. Elena's victory demonstrated that military service created permanent bonds, protecting families from civilian discrimination while establishing institutional networks, ensuring veteran recognition and accommodation that federal law required and military sacrifice had earned through combat operations defending American constitutional freedoms. Miguel's leadership development included understanding that protecting military families required same tactical precision and institutional commitment shown eliminating enemy threats overseas, creating career foundation built on defending those who'd already sacrificed for national security through combat service and continuing contribution. The Sunrise Café incident became training scenario for military personnel learning civilian-military relations while demonstrating how military communities could protect veteran families through institutional solidarity, that discrimination couldn't defeat and civilian prejudice couldn't divide when brotherhood activated for family honor and constitutional protection. Elena continues veteran advocacy, while her military family legacy inspires next generation of warriors whose service builds upon sacrifice made by previous generations defending American freedoms through combat operations and institutional commitment to constitutional principles. The Rodriguez Protocol became federal policy requiring business training on veteran recognition and disability accommodation, while establishing rapid response networks protecting military families from civilian discrimination that violated constitutional principles and federal law requiring institutional accountability and community education. Elena addressed congressional committees monthly her Marine Corps leadership experience, providing credibility that influenced federal legislation while inspiring military communities whose support demonstrated institutional commitment to protecting veteran families through policy changes and community partnerships that conventional advocacy couldn't achieve without military involvement. The Department of Justice created veteran protection divisions investigating systematic discrimination, while federal legislation established enhanced penalties for businesses violating disability accommodation requirements that military service had earned through combat sacrifice and continuing contribution to national security operations protecting civilian populations. Federal funding supported veteran advocacy programs, while Elena's case demonstrated how military leadership translated to civilian advocacy, protecting vulnerable populations from institutional discrimination and systematic harassment, requiring federal intervention and community education. Elena Rodriguez discovered that her Marine Corps leadership tested through combat operations translated directly to civilian advocacy, protecting disabled veterans from discrimination while inspiring military communities whose support transcended service branch boundaries and active duty status limitations. Her law practice specialized in veteran disability rights, while providing pro bono services to military families facing civilian discrimination that federal agencies investigated through partnerships Elena had established between military communities and civilian advocacy organizations serving vulnerable populations. The cafe, where she faced discrimination, became headquarters for veteran advocacy events, while demonstrating how civilian businesses could transform institutional policies to honor military service through accommodation exceeding legal requirements and community recognition, honoring sacrifice made defending American constitutional freedoms. The Sunrise Café incident proved that military families remained protected by institutional brotherhood that transcended active service periods, extending community support when civilian discrimination threatened veterans whose sacrifice had earned recognition rather than harassment and accommodation denial. Elena learned that Marine Corps leadership skills applied directly to civilian advocacy, protecting vulnerable populations with same tactical precision shown defending American interests overseas through combat operations. Honor earned through military service extends to protecting military families with same intensity shown defending constitutional freedoms. When military communities unite, civilian discrimination cannot withstand institutional brotherhood defending those who served. In the end, Elena Rodriguez learned that the same Marine Corps values that saved American lives overseas protected military families at home. Her son's Rangers proved that military brotherhood never retires, it just changes uniforms while maintaining the mission of protecting those who served.